Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. In this episode of the Solar Maverick Podcast, I'm excited to be the first guest on Sunvoy's new podcast series, What Solar Installers Need to Know. In episode 1, The Road to 2050, What's Next for Renewables, I join host Joe for a deep dive into the trends and technology shaping the future of solar and clean energy. We cover a lot of topics in the podcast interview. Some of them that we cover are the rise of community solar and how to navigate interconnection hurdles, how new tax credits are transforming solar project financing, the impact of tariffs, supply chain shifts, and evolving market dynamics, what's next in solar tech from blockchain to vehicle to grid technology and integration. Huge thanks to Sunvoy for having me and kicking off what promises to be an essential series for solar professionals. We also had the pleasure of featuring Joe and Hervé on the Solar Maverick podcast in episode 161, How Sunvay's software helps solar installers. Let's get into it. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick podcast. We will be having several in-person events coming in May and June for the Solar Maverick podcast. I'll be recording a live Solar Maverick podcast interview at the Mid-Atlantic Solar and Storage Conference on May 6th in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Looking forward to insightful conversation with industry leaders. Also, mark your calendars. The Solar Maverick podcast is hosting a summer solstice fundraiser to support Let's Share the Sun on June 5th in Jersey City, New Jersey. It's going to be an incredible evening for a great cause. More details will be shared in the podcast show notes. Stay tuned and let's get into it. I think in the near future, hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, all 50 states should have some sort of community solar program, which is exciting because I think it creates an opportunity for people who don't have solar to have solar and get a 5 to 10% savings. But it also creates a lot of economic opportunity from it. Obviously, the development, the construction, the ongoing maintenance. Also, it helps with the grid. Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
I will say that our business is stronger than it has ever been.
The successive growth and where I see companies growing consistently really is your people.
I mean, the story is not, does it make power? Because they all make power. The story is, what does it power?
This is What Solar Installers Need to Know with your hosts, Hervé Billier and Joe Marhamati.
Hi there, it's Hervé and Joe with What Solar Installers Need to Know, where we interview solar CEOs and experts on how they run their business on the solar coaster. We ask their private revenue numbers, we give actionable advice, and learn about trade secrets so you can run and grow your solar business. Joe and I built a solar company from 0 to 12 million in sales and got successfully acquired. If you'd like to do the same or do better, go to sunvoy.com/blog to get actionable behind-the-scenes lessons on running and growing your solar business. And now, without further ado, let's jump right into the next episode.
Hey everybody, my name is Joe Marhamati. I'm one of the co-founders of Sunvoy, and I'm here on the What Solar Installers Need to Know podcast with Benoy Thanjan, CEO and founder of Renew Energy. They're developing 80 megawatts of solar projects, and he also is the host of the Solar Maverick podcast. Welcome, Benoy.
Thanks, Joe, for having me on the podcast. It's really great to be here. And, we had both you and Hervé on the Solar Maverick podcast, episode 161, How Sunvoy Software Helps Solar Installers. I'm excited that you guys are doing your own podcast, and I really appreciate you having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I know we met in person at Intersolar a couple of weeks ago, and we were just joking about how this is not your first rodeo, but it's actually my first rodeo in the sense that it's my first episode hosting the What Solar Installers Need to Know podcast. But that's okay. I've done a few other interviews. I mentioned I did college radio before, so I think this is going to go great. And I've got a list of questions very specific to your experience. And the first one, I actually don't know if I know the answer to this, even though we've talked so many times. Walk us through your journey into the solar industry. What first got you interested in solar?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a long journey to get to this point. Now, amazing. I've been in the solar and energy industry for 20 years, and it's been most of my career has been in energy. Primarily, I first actually was doing my MBA, and I worked at Deloitte & Touche as an intern And then the partner in the energy group I worked for that summer, and then she ended up giving me an offer after summer internship was over. Then I started working at Deloitte in their energy financial advisory services practice. And that was an amazing experience, especially coming right out of school. I was there for 3 years. She's actually now the head of the renewable energy group at Deloitte and Touche, which is interesting. And then I wanted to work on the investment side, or what they call the buy side, private equity. So my background's in finance. I have an MBA and undergrad in finance. And then I worked at a private equity fund called Ridgewood Renewable Power, and they own basically renewable energy projects, not solar at the time. It was biomass, hydro, landfill gas, predominantly in the US. They had some international assets. So I helped with potential investments, maximizing the existing portfolio. Then eventually they decided to get out of the business and sell projects. And so I worked on the sale of all those projects. And then I was doing research, and maybe it was like 14 years ago, 15 years ago. It's kind of crazy. More than that. Oh my gosh. When I think about it. And I was doing so much research, and I was thinking that solar, this is like 16 years ago, was going to be a huge part of the energy transition going forward. And I was telling everyone, hey, solar is going to be huge. This is like 16 years ago. 15 years. Like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, I have to get a job at a solar company. I have renewables, I have energy experience. So I worked at an EPC, a contractor called Vanguard Energy Partners. They're a large commercial, industrial, utility scale installer based in Branchburg, New Jersey. I was doing project finance for them. We did some of the first tax equity sort of structuring for projects in New Jersey, then got a lot of experience with SREX. So that's kind of how I got into the solar industry, was really being in energy. I really was able to break into renewables because I'm passionate about renewables and sustainability, but I felt like the biggest impact could be, in solar. And then after that, I worked at Tesla Solar City. I started their environmental commodities trading desk at project finance. Then I started Renew Energy. Now it's going to be 13 years, which is pretty amazing to see. And we obviously develop projects. We're also very involved in renewable energy credits. We brokered about 45 million, 50 million in rec transactions. And then we do also owner rep related work. So helping building owners or large companies look at, their existing facilities or land sites to do solar.
It's funny you say 16 years ago, because the second you said 16 years ago, I was thinking about, where was I 16 years ago? And I was actually starting my career in solar at the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office when they were financing all of the first utility scale solar projects over 100 megawatts. And there were several that I got to go out to and work with developers on in the sort of project finance shop within DOE that's still there. And, one stood out to me was this Tonopah 110 megawatt solar concentrating project, thousands of billboard sized mirrors on a 600-foot tower. And it was an amazing project to witness the development of. Was there a project in your career, earlier in your career, that really just blew you away, where you thought, this is going to be the future? We're going to have hundreds or thousands of these all over the country and all over the world, that inspired you to, get into and develop Renew Energy?
Yeah, definitely. So the one that got me excited was one of the first projects that I worked for at Vanguard Energy Partners. It was the Somerset County project, which was funded through a municipal bond financing and the 1603 grant, which was during your time, which enabled that project to happen. And obviously the 1603 grant led to a lot of construction of solar because of that. And it was also owned by Citigroup, and they also did a sort of municipal bond financing based on the sort of county credit. And then it was, I think, maybe 14 projects, and it was 7.1 megawatts. At the time, it seemed like a really huge behind the meter project. And then we're able to aggregate the different publicly owned facilities by Somerset County. And it was at the time what the first of its kind and extremely complicated. And that got me really excited. And it's amazing, obviously, to see how big projects have gotten now. And 6.7 megawatts is not much these days, which is obviously exciting,
So what gets you excited now? What type of project are you working on, or do you see coming down the pike that, gets you excited today?
So, we're doing a lot of community solar in New York and New Jersey. What gets me excited about community solar, it's an opportunity for people who don't have access to solar to be able to get a discount on their electricity bills. Also, like it focuses on low, moderate income. Obviously a major expense is people's electricity bill, and they're able to save money and also be using renewables. We're actually doing the largest solar project in Manhattan with the New York Housing Authority on 12 different buildings for 2 housing developments in Harlem, which we're going to start construction in about a month or two. And then it's an amazing project because it's all privately funded. We partnered with a private equity fund that's going to provide a lease payment to the New York Housing Authority to use their roof. Then we're providing discounted low moderate income communities, discounted electricity with the offtake for customers in Con Ed service territory. We also organized 2 job fairs with one of our partners in this project, Kinetic Communities. And so we organized 2 like New York clean energy job fairs and was able to get, I think it's 8 jobs for NYCHA residents. And a few of them were hired by, we're not the EPC for this project, but they were also hired to build the project that we're going to build. And it's kind of the first of its kind that could be used in other housing authorities in other cities. So, and it's so complicated of a project, just obviously working with the many different city agencies and the incentives. And then I don't know if people are familiar with New York, but they have like a tariff called VDER, which is the Value Distributed Energy Resources. So, it took a long time for us to get an investor comfortable with this type of project. The mayor of New York City, Mayor Adams, put up a press release about this project because, he thinks it's a pretty cool project. So that's one of the projects that we're currently working on that I'm really excited about. And it'll be the largest solar project in Manhattan.
Wow. Congratulations. That's really cool. So I talked to a lot of rooftop installers who are doing behind the meter projects, and they might be considering community solar. Maybe they get some opportunities here and there, but perhaps they're intimidated by it, or they think that it's not within their skill set or their scope. So if you're talking to a behind the meter rooftop installer that's used to doing self-consumption, owner-occupied buildings, what advice would you give to them about the opportunities in the community solar space?
Yeah, so I think the community solar space actually offers a lot of opportunities. Obviously, not every building's owner occupied, and the easiest thing to do is either they own the system directly or they do some sort of power purchase agreement. And it's obviously easy to show the savings. But I think community solar allows like non-owner occupied, or say if there's excess generation that maybe can't be used, that they could potentially do a community solar project instead. So it creates opportunity because obviously there's a lot of large sort of rooftop owners who lease out their building to different types of customers. And usually these customers are using, especially when you talk about commercial, industrial, like a large amount of electricity. We're also seeing building tenants are requiring that their electricity be from renewable resources. So obviously, if you're able to market that, that you have like rooftop solar, or even like there could be some land around the property, I think it creates another opportunity. It's obviously a more complicated sale than owner occupied, but I think it creates more opportunity to sell more rooftop solar, which is the most important.
I love community solar because it's accessible to everybody. The people who have shade on their roof, the people who live in apartments. I've actually encouraged and successfully convinced several family members who are very right wing to go with community solar and save 5-10% on their utility bill because a lot of times now you can opt out. You can opt out with no penalty. It's basically zero risk and pure savings. And because anybody can do it, it's a great catalyst for growing solar coast to coast. Whereas obviously in rooftop solar, it's kind of roof by roof. You have to look at the shade profile. It's just more narrow. And so it sounds like you're going to be working on community solar projects for many years. What % of your portfolio do you think is going to be community solar versus the big stuff?
Yeah, so I would say like maybe 70 to 80% will be community solar, and then 20% is utility scale. Right now, actually, our like pipelines mostly New York community solar, not just obviously we talked about the NYCHA rooftop opportunity, but we're doing a lot of land opportunities. Also like 5 megawatts AC land, community solar opportunities. And I think the great thing too, obviously you did a great job, Joe, mentioning the benefits of community solar. And it's also quicker to get these projects like permitted, and you don't have to go through like certain queue processes compared to utility scale. So you're able to get these projects to come online. And I think in the near future, hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, all 50 states should have some sort of community solar program, which is exciting because I think it creates obviously like an opportunity for people who don't have solar to have solar and get a 5 to 10% savings, as you mentioned, but it also creates a lot of economic opportunity from it. Obviously, the development, the construction, the ongoing maintenance. Also, too, like we didn't talk about, it helps with the grid. Grid and infrastructure is extremely old. Having community solar or any distributed energy projects save on, the amount of upgrades that's required on the grid in the future, and creates actually energy independence as well, too. Obviously, the more solar that's online, instead of getting it from a big power plant and transmission and distribution, it allows like distributed energy.
Love that. Yeah, if we could get community solar legislation enabling in every state, that would be amazing. I'm going to crib a question from Energy Sage because I was on an Energy Sage podcast interview an hour ago, and I'm going to ask it to you because it was a really good question. If you were king of the solar industry for a day, what would you do? What one change would you make, or policy? Wave a magic wand. What would you change?
Is this for the US or is it internationally?
Let's say for the US.
Okay. Well, that's a great question. I have basically national rules on interconnection.
That's what I said. We have the same answer. All right. No, but you're on the other side because I've mostly done obviously behind the meters. You're a little bit more front of meter community solar. So what change would you make on the interconnection side?
So I don't know how familiar people are with this, but really the developers paying for the interconnection upgrade for a community solar project, which is actually not fair because it's creating a lot of benefits for the utility and others. So I believe the utility should be subsidizing or paying a portion of it. But I know this is a lot easier to say, but to actually get it done. But I mean, they really should be actively looking at the benefits, and it shouldn't be all up to the developer. The great thing with the investment tax credit now is that it includes also the interconnection upgrade costs. But you really do you can't put it all on the developer. If the utility is able to subsidize a portion of that cost, that will allow more proliferation of community solar.
That's a good answer. And tell me, how has your perspective on solar project financing evolved over the last decade? Since you've been in this game for over 15 years, how has your perspective on solar project financing changed?
So to me, obviously the Inflation Reduction Act, having transferability instead of the complicated structuring of solar projects, obviously that's really beneficial to streamline the transactions. I think the financing community is always behind on certain things. It takes them a while. For example, merchant power, energy storage, and the different cash flow streams. Right now, it's extremely challenging to hedge unless you're in certain markets or if they have long-term contracting, for example, the SMART program in Massachusetts. So, I mean, too, uncertainty as well. It's challenging times actually from a financing perspective because of the potential repeal of the tax credits, which I don't think is going to happen. Also, a high interest rate environment. So it's creating challenges. And I believe this is all basic sort of stuff. And it's the ones who understand the risk and who could be able to finance more projects. But right now, it's extremely difficult. And then also development capital too, getting early stage capital. Obviously, I think things are simpler now than they were in the past. But, the financing community usually wants other parties to do it. And then once they see other entities getting comfortable with it, they're more likely to follow suit. So it's interesting because my background's in finance, but now I pretty much do everything, but I do look at things obviously from a financial perspective.
Tell me a little bit more about the rec business, because you mentioned that sort of in passing. I didn't realize you were doing that kind of volume. I normally think of Sol Systems, SREC Trade, Flight Exchange, some of the big national aggregators. You're doing that kind of volume on SRECs just within your business?
Yeah, so we started as a rec broker, and so when I say the $40 million in renewable energy credit transaction volume, that's over the 13 years of business. I'm sure the big companies, as you talked about, I don't know how much volume Flight Exchanges are doing, obviously more volume than us. So my background actually is in RECs, at Ridgewood Renewable Power, I actually managed RECs as well on their behalf. And so I have 18 years of REC experience. I started Solar Cities / Tesla's SREC or REC trading desk when they were moving to the East Coast markets. That's how we actually started Renew Energy as a REC broker and asset manager. So we actually manage about maybe 20 megawatts of projects where we're basically managing like the PJM GATS account. We actually do customized research on the REC markets too, which initially we were just doing the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, the compliance markets. But now, so I thought with some states obviously getting rid of RECs, New Jersey moving more to like a fixed REC program. You have Massachusetts with the SREC 1-2 program, and now they moved to a feed-in tariff, that RECs would actually slow down. But now large corporations are looking to buy, RECs, lower value RECs, to basically meet their sort of 100% renewable energy goals. So we're now getting a lot of business. So that's kind of why I moved. We did financing for a while, we were brokering financing, which we still do. But then we're like, hey, we're helping developers with just financing. And then they were asking us to do a lot of other things. So then I'm like, why don't we just start developing our own projects? But now it's interesting too, because now the REC business is actually coming back. And there's not a lot of people with that sort of knowledge. And we're actually helping corporations, both domestically and internationally, coming up with the strategy of procuring and managing RECs on their behalf. So I think it brings great perspective too, just because I've seen the REC markets over 18 or 19 years and involved in a lot of transactions. It's a great opportunity for corporates if they don't have enough on-site solar to meet their 100% sort of renewable energy portfolio standard to buy RECs and then retire it. And I don't know how deep you want to get into this conversation, but greenies are very popular, in the US for a standard, a REC standard that makes corporates comfortable, because a lot of corporates use greenie RECs. The other thing too I find interesting is corporates want the RECs close to where their facilities or buildings are. So that kind of creates as well more of an investment in those areas too.
It's funny because I spent a minute in the Obama White House in the Council on Environmental Quality, and we were trying to encourage federal agencies to go 100% renewable energy. And of course, they all wanted to buy RECs. And so I had a colleague there who thought that RECs was equivalent to buying your way out of hell. And what I'm hearing you say is there's actually a direct line between some of these large entities trying to go 100% net zero by purchasing RECs and the development of new projects and investment in new projects. You can draw a direct line between those two things.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a great thing that I think the corporates are doing, because that incentivizes more development. And what we're seeing is interesting is REC prices, especially even the low value RECs, are starting to go up in price. And as solar continues to get cheaper, you don't need the $200 SREC. Obviously, that was a time when panels were $450 a watt or $375. Solar is a technology, not a fuel, so production obviously is going to increase and the price is going to go down. These lower value RECs are now a great cash flow stream to allow development of projects in markets that maybe that didn't work, so it's exciting actually to see that. And then, obviously, the current administration hasn't, obviously, it's only been 2 months, but it's really going to be up to state level legislation and corporates to continue the demand for renewable energy. And I believe, we need so much electricity to come online that you're going to need all renewable resources and all fossil fuel. I mean, it's interesting to see, how plants are not getting mothballed, that they're keeping in operation. There's the 3 Mile Island plant, which is a nuclear plant they're planning on reopening because there's not enough electricity generation in the US. And obviously, solar is the easiest and fastest way to put electricity onto the grid. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but
yeah. Well, speaking of the new administration, what do you think tariffs are going to do to the current environment? Do you think we have enough domestic manufacturing to keep up with the pace, or do you think it's going to have a demonstrable impact on development?
I think the thing about tariffs and is it, obviously forces us to look at domestically manufacturing. And as part of the, Inflation Reduction Act, there was incentives for manufacturing with the flex tax credit. Interesting thing was, I don't know if you saw this, Joe, which blew my mind, was SEIA came out with a press release 3 or 4 weeks ago saying that we're producing enough solar in the US that we've exported, which is amazing to me because I thought it was going to take 3 to 5 years, not 2 years, 3 years. I think at the end of the day, what we realized during COVID was, so I'm a big free trade person, but during like some sort of like pandemic, how challenging it was to get not just solar equipment, any sort of important supplies, medicine, and other things. So I think like I was very against the tariff, but now I think like it's amazing because we need these essential sort of manufacturing to be in the US. The other thing, it obviously creates jobs for American citizens, and it can't be imported to other countries. So I think tariffs, in a sense, has forced the solar industry to become more creative. Obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act has created a lot of jobs in manufacturing in red states too. So that's what's great too. Obviously, people are talking about tax credit repealment, but really, like a lot of these incentives have created jobs in red states. So.
Okay, I'm really going to go off on a tangent. I'm just humoring myself here because I'm so curious how you've evolved on this subject. There's a quote I've been thinking about for the last several weeks. I think it was JD Vance said that 300 cheap toasters is not worth one American job. What do you think about that today? Do you agree with that? Or you have more of a nuanced view? Because it sounds like you've evolved on this.
I don't know. I don't think toasters are an essential industry.
And solar panels, but you're biased.
I'm biased, but obviously, even though I'm in the solar industry, I'm a finance person and capitalist. I had issues about the tariffs. But if another country puts a tariff on us, we should be putting like an equal tariff on their goods as well. And what that allows is it starts creating manufacturing in the US. The other thing too is like technology is getting so advanced that a lot of it's done by, robotics. It's not as like physical as maybe the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, where, it's very capital intensive. But to have these essential industries, like for certain product, some like commodity, certain industries, like I believe like we should try to onshore medical supplies, pharmaceutical products. Toasters, to me, we could live without. Like, it's fine if we want to buy it from other countries. I thought it was interesting, by the way, President Trump in the prior time he was president, he was putting, tariffs on solar, but he was also putting tariffs on washer and dryers in Asia, which I didn't understand, like the strategy behind that. So I believe not everything there should be tariffs. Like other countries could produce it at a lot cheaper, but essential sort of things like cars, transportation. I think Kia just announced like they're going to invest in somewhere down south. They're going to like build a huge like car manufacturing facility. Apple just recently said that they're going to bring, domestic manufacturing into the US. So it's not just going to be totally outsourced. And COVID's been like 5 years away, but I do think that we're going to have probably more pandemics, unfortunately, in the future, and then more that could be deadlier than, COVID. And so I believe like we should have a certain amount of stuff that we're manufacturing here than being totally dependent on our food supply and other things.
It's a good answer. It's a difficult subject. And I appreciate you referencing the SIA study because I did notice that, and I thought that was really interesting. That they basically are saying that we're years ahead of schedule in terms of where we thought we'd be in domestic manufacturing. And I also was very skeptical at the time, but I walked the floor on the Dalton, Georgia facility that QCell built, and seeing that facility, it was inspiring to see modules made by our compatriots here. And they're, I think, expanding that facility or plans to expand that facility, and obviously facilities in Arizona and Florida, like you say, a lot of the red states. And so I think we made a good bet and good thing for it because we're going to need it. I got to ask, what do you think the solar industry isn't paying attention to right now, either in terms of untapped opportunities and speaking to installers? Again, like, we're talking mostly to rooftop installers that are maybe doing 50-50 resi commercial, but mostly self-consumption projects. What should they be looking at in terms of untapped opportunities?
So I talked about this a little bit before, and I feel like the also sentiment of our country has changed. Like we really should be, as solar, pushing like, you want to be energy independent, right? It's not just certain freedoms that are determined in the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, but you should be energy free and you should own a solar and storage unit. You'll be independent from the grid. And what we know is that there are going to be more blackouts happening in the future. Obviously, if you couple it with an EV, it's going to be a lot cheaper than having, a gas consumption or combustible vehicle. So really, like, you could get to control because that's the one thing to talk about is energy independence, but then also the price of energy is going to go up exponentially. And we're already starting to see that obviously in capacity markets. Like I know, Joe, you're pretty familiar with PGM, and we're already starting to see that translate into residential customers' bill. And, for 20 years, we've been saying, oh yeah, the rate is going to increase by, if it's 0 to 2%, obviously there are some people putting, these projections of 20 years of 3 to 5%. But I think you're going to start seeing like exponential increases, not but high percentage of increase. And really, like installers, you have to get it into the customer's mind that it's not just about renewable resources. It's also about energy independence and controlling something that's going to increase substantially with inflation. And you could basically hedge it. Once you have solar installed, obviously all the energy that you're getting is, well, depending on how it's structured as a PPA or if you own the facility. And I think with the way our country is going, like that resonates, energy independence. And I don't think we talk about that enough in the industry.
It's funny. I've got a customer, a Sunvoy customer, very large one on the East Coast, a rooftop installer, and they actually will allocate their marketing dollars based on where utility rates are increasing. They will move them from one location to another. And I'll put a plug in for Genability. They actually track all these tariffs throughout the whole country, and they'll send you, I think, monthly or weekly reports as utility rates increase. And I used to track that in my own solar business. I would see where utility rates were increasing across our installation territory. And those are the folks who would inevitably be reaching out when they had a $600 utility bill. So yeah, I think that is a huge untapped opportunity for installers and developers to really look where there are markets of utility rates that are outpacing inflation, which if you look at the last few years, it was in most of the country, utility rates were outpacing inflation, which obviously helping the solar industry too.
Yeah, definitely. That obviously helps as energy continues to get more expensive. That increases rates. That's smart, obviously, to follow where rates are going up the highest. And also maybe like coupling other resources like energy efficiency or bringing partners in. Obviously, I talked about EVs as well. But like I think smart metering too, as well. Like I just feel like with Google Nest, like now residential customers are more aware. You might know even better than me, looking at their app, seeing like how much solar is generated on particular days and how much they're offsetting or savings, maybe even gamifying applications. I've seen startup companies doing that. I think, more and more people are interested in that. But I think the real thing is energy independence. I've been through some major Hurricane Sandy and some other events. I was actually just in Puerto Rico installing solar and storage for residential homes with a charity called Let's Share the Sun Foundation, where they help install solar and storage for people who have 24-hour medical needs where they need electricity. And in that town, we lost electricity for most of the day. And then after New Year's, most of Puerto Rico's grid went out for 3 or 4 days. So I know in the US, we've been like, oh, you just turn on the switch. But I think what people don't realize with the aging infrastructure, we're going to see more blackouts, power outs. We also have the issue of cyber attacks, where people are trying to take down our grid. So obviously, if you have localized energy, I'm actually surprised because part of the time I live in San Diego, and I'm surprised like how many times we lose electricity. I'm like, wow, this is like a first world country and city, and we're losing power like maybe 2 or 3 times a month for like a few hours. And I'm like, to me, that's very surprising, especially, in 2025. But everything's going to be smart.
Yeah. It's funny, when I used to sell solar several years ago and storage was just coming out, I would tell homeowners that it was zombie apocalypse insurance, because as long as the sun rose in the morning and was powering that battery, they could run their home for indefinitely. And there are people doing that now. Obviously, when storage first came out, it was more difficult, but now you've got Black Star batteries. You can actually have 20, 30, 40 kilowatt hours at your home. And you see people going off grid, especially during the summer months, sometimes for days or weeks at a time. And it's pretty impressive. It seems to me that in 5-10 years, solar and storage could be almost as ubiquitous as HVAC. Like it'll be strange to not have a battery next to your air conditioner because your neighbor will have one. Do you really think that that's where we're headed?
I definitely think it's headed. I mean, right now, like we're seeing the same cost declines in lithium ion batteries that we were seeing back in the solar. I mean, we're still seeing large drops, but like I think the past 3 years, lithium ion prices have gone down 40%. And I think you're going to see even more dramatic decreases. I had the experience of installing a Dyno Power energy storage residential unit that's based in China. And obviously, like, China has been very aggressive on developing lithium ion battery technology. BYD is like creating electric vehicles a lot cheaper than a Tesla, but obviously with the tariffs, it's more expensive. The other thing too is electric cars are going to go down dramatically in prices because the battery is the most expensive part. And then I think the other thing too, in Intersolar, I saw a lot of battery companies that were using other technology outside of lithium ion and more fail-safe, where you don't have to worry about fires as much. As it's interesting. It's still very early. I wouldn't be surprised in 3 to 5 years. I mean, I was also at RE Plus in Hawaii as well in January, and it was just interesting, especially like islands, like they understand the issues with not having power and blackouts and obviously having a lot of sun. Like most of them, if you have a solar and storage system, and obviously the sun is rising every day, you could basically be off grid. So I think most Americans and myself will want to have an off grid solution. I think most Americans understand that.
Yeah, especially if you've got sun on that roof and with the cost coming down and with vehicle to grid technology becoming, hopefully, commercialized, always just around the corner. I got to ask you, how do you think BYD is making cars so cheap? Is it just scale? Is there some government intervention there? Do you have a theory on this?
I mean, there's a couple of things I have about this. I was actually reading, I forgot where I was reading it this past week, but they have so the real way of like reducing the cost of a lithium ion battery, by the way, I learned this at Tesla, is like everything has to be in one location. Before, it was expensive because you're doing all these different things by the way, I'm not a scientist, as you said before, I'm a finance person. So like having everything in one space, and then I don't know how many gigawatts the BYD plant, there's one plant they have in China that is like the biggest basically battery storage plant. Due to economies of scale, they're able to, lower the lithium ion battery prices compared to the other thing. I think as well, like the difference between the US and China looks at energy storage as a vital industry to have now in the future. And obviously they've invested a lot of money into these companies as well to expedite the whole process. Obviously, you were a part of the time of when the Department of Energy funded Tesla, or maybe you weren't, but it was huge to the US economy and is now, So I think like as a country, like we should be nationally being more strategic and investing in like industries that we think are going to be, huge game changers in the future. And I mean, the great thing about the US is our innovation, and we're constantly innovating faster than other countries, even without the public sector. I mean, now as not actively involved, but that could change in the future too, because like the growth effect too, like from having that and what it does for the economy is really hard to factor. If you really think about it, like we wouldn't be where we are in electric vehicles without Tesla. And that happened through the loan
program.
And obviously Elon Musk paid back the loan, but the economic opportunity that it created, both for the US and internationally, is substantial.
It's enormous. Yeah. And of course, there were a lot of unsung projects in the program too, from utility scale solar projects that I think were one of the major catalysts of the current industry. The manufacturing, cellulosic biofuels, the first new nuclear reactor in 30 years, geothermal, the list goes on and on. Of course, the ATVM program, which also invested in a lot of the technologies that are commercialized today. And so kudos to the Loan Programs Office, even if it's only online every 4 years. Some good people still there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting because it becomes political, right? Like, I can't believe I'm forgetting the panel manufacturer company that received a lot of
Solyndra.
Yeah. Like, you can't assume that every investment in early stage important technology, as you mentioned, there's some big hits that allowed, the industry to get to where it is. Not everything's going to be perfect, but unfortunately, politically, at a certain time, everyone was talking about Solyndra, which annoyed me to a certain
Me too. I was in the room when they announced that, and it was a sad day. But fortunately, I think still 98% plus of the investments of the program are doing well.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, where do you think the industry and renewables in general is going to be in 2050? You know, there's a lot of these net zero promises that the countries and corporates are still sticking to. Where do you think the energy mix is going to be in 2050?
Yeah, I mean, that's 25 years from now. It's interesting to me, like right now, the US solar generation's only 5% of the total mix of energy. So I can't imagine in 25 years, I think like solar is going to be the dominant form of energy. I think there's going to be obviously there'll still be, fossil fuels. You talked about like modular nuclear. I think there could be like you'll see a proliferation of microgrids. I think there's going to be some technologies that we don't even know about. Especially, it's amazing to me like how AI is advancing so quickly. Like even ChatGPT every month or two is like getting more and more advanced, which I see, because I use a lot of the AI tools. So, I believe like solar is going to be like the majority, solar and storage is going to be, I would say it should be in 2050, like 60 to 70% of the total generation mixed with other sort of fuels. And then energy is going to be smart, right? You're already starting to see the utilities look at time of use, ways of like, dispatching batteries into the grid. And I don't think we could imagine it. First of all, like if I look at the 17 years I've been in the industry, like I can't even imagine like where we are now. Like, you know what? I should spend time and think about this. Like when I first came into the industry, like solar was like, just a panel was like $4.40 per watt. Now it kind of ranges, let's say it's like 30 to 50 cents. And just to see even storage, like how quickly it is. And if you look, like if you fly over the US and internationally, like most rooftops don't have solar. And that's like the target market. Like eventually every rooftop will have solar because, I mean, it already makes too much sense, right? Especially if you're behind the meter, it works in every state. Obviously, like their challenge is related to roofing and roof replacement. And so basically you have to have, solar with a relatively new roof or restoration. But I think, we'll figure that out. And I'm really excited. It's still, obviously, if we have some younger listeners here, like I'm really excited because it's still early in the energy transition when it comes to renewables, specifically solar. And even though I've been in it a long time, like I could see that this is all going to happen even more exponentially than I could even imagine in my mind. And especially when you get to 2050.
Every time I'm up high in some city and I look down on all these rooftops and I see 1% of the roofs have solar, it always blows my mind, especially when I'm in Arizona. I was in Arizona a couple of years ago. I was at the top of a mountain. I was looking down on all these roofs and I could barely see any solar projects. There were some, obviously, but still the vast, vast, vast majority of them didn't have solar in a state with infinite sun. So do you think there's going to be some tipping point? And what could that look like? Where if you're just an average business owner and you have one or two properties, maybe you've got a mid or large size roof and you don't know anything about solar, what's going to be the thing that pushes that average person that's not aware of our industry to consider solar? Is it just going to be sky high utility rates? Is it going to be dirt cheap solar panels that now, you're seeing they're so cheap, they're actually using them as fencing and building materials in some parts of the world, which is mind blowing to me. What's going to be the catalyst for everybody to put solar on their roof?
Yeah, I mean, like it's amazing to me. Like when we talk about 10 or 15 years ago, talking about solar, most people had no idea like what you're talking about. But it's interesting to me that both the residential customers and commercial customers are a lot more educated about solar than before. But I think the real driver is going to be electricity pricing. We're in the start of this whole thing of electricity pricing rising substantially. But wait till it keeps coming. Like people are going to adjust and, they're going to educate themselves. And there's so much knowledge out there now in the solar industry than ever before. I think the other exciting thing is like building products. Obviously, we know, windows and any paint and all these things will have like, solar panels in it. And obviously, like it's still in the early stages of that, technology. But I really think it's going to be electricity prices are going to force people because it's a large part of their expenses. And then obviously solar is going to continue to get cheaper. As I said, it's a technology, not a fuel. And then once you couple that with storage, like that's like the game changer. Everyone's like, what do I do when it's dark outside? And you're like, oh, well, when storage becomes economical enough, which is not that far away, that's 3 to 5 years. So I think you're going to see I think we can't even imagine. I don't think I could imagine like how much growth is going to be like once batteries become economical and you don't really need incentives and combining those two. Sorry, this is like a long-winded answer to your question, Joe, but I really think like once people start seeing the exponential increases of electricity costs and it's sitting there first, they'll start being like, we can't keep doing this, you know?
Speaking of intermittency, when somebody asks you the intermittency question and says, how can you not just have solar move through a day or a week, but through seasons? That, solar's never going to scale or it's going to have a ceiling because the technology is just not able to account for intermittency over long periods of time. How do you respond to that?
You're talking about like basically when there's no sun out, or basically the seasons like fall, like winter production of the system and fall production of the system.
Exactly.
As you said, solar panels are getting so cheap that actually I was reading an article today that in California, they're basically having negative electricity pricing because there's now an excess of solar panels. So at a certain point, like I believe everywhere, it's better to actually oversize your system because the incremental cost of putting more solar is really very marginal. But then, when you have these seasons where maybe it's cloudy and you're not getting enough production, that it'll be able to cover that sort of intermittency issue. And then obviously, I feel like too, people are going to also, as storage gets cheaper, they're probably going to have more excess than they need because it's not as incremental as before, or it's worth that energy independence. I also believe like somehow people are going to incorporate other technologies. And obviously you could always self-consume. You could consume from the grid, but I also think there's going to be a way of like communities, like through a microgrid, where you could share, any excess electricity with your neighbor, and there's some sort of like, payment system in the future.
The blockchain is coming. You think it's actually going to be?
Yeah.
I've been hearing about it for a long time. Is it coming?
We've been talking about storage for like 10 to 12 years. Yeah, storage is going to be big. Finally we're starting to see like the blockchain is obviously there's been some startups to do it, but I think eventually you'll see that. And as now like people don't really pay in cash anymore. Everyone's doing like virtual transactions. You're seeing cryptocurrency like Bitcoin being adopted by major financial institutions. Even they, I think, have like sort of a mutual fund ETF where you can invest in Bitcoin. So I think in other countries, people are more progressive on that because they have like issues with currency. And, it's not like the US dollar, which is basically the main currency for trading. But when you're in countries that have hyperinflation, you have to diversify outside of your currency. So it's interesting to see in other countries how big like, the blockchain or crypto is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't wait for that technology to come through. I can't wait for vehicle to grid technology to come through. I've been waiting for years. It seems like it's just the nuclear fusion of the solar industry. It's like, oh yeah.
I think the technology is out there. I just think obviously like the utilities are going to be more hesitant to use it. And, it's challenging because obviously, this probably better than me, like just laws and regulations, and to get to explain to some of these agencies and, maybe they're not incentivized, right, to do it, right? Because the other thing too is like the modern utility to its day is going to be totally different 25 years in the future. And, unfortunately, like a lot of utilities are holding into what they've been successful or trying to slow down this sort of transition. And then also just educating people, just like when it's going to happen. Right now, I still feel like we're kind of early, but there are a lot of exciting companies that are trying to have that technology, but it's not like used in mass, or marketed well enough, so.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And the reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast and that I actually got through 10% of my questions, I could talk to you for hours. I was a solar installer that was intimidated by developing large projects, by getting deep into community solar and utility scale projects. And so part of what I wanted to do today, I think that we accomplished, is to demystify developing large front of meter projects, which you've done so well. I really appreciate you being here today. And where can people find you?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the time, Joe. So you could find me on LinkedIn. It's Benoy Thanjan on LinkedIn. The company is Renew Energy. We're actually in the process of updating our website. It's reneuenergy.com. And I have a weekly solar podcast called the Solar Maverick Podcast, which is one of the most popular podcasts in solar. 203 episodes that we've released. We come out every week. and we talk to major leaders in the solar sector and hear what they're doing. We have the pleasure on episode 161 to have Joe and Hervé on the podcast to talk about Sunvoy. So, actually a very interesting conversation. I got a lot of great feedback from that. So I appreciate you making the time. And like these platforms that we're creating and communicating. Now I've done 203 podcasts. It's amazing how it's helped people in the industry or come into the industry. And I appreciate, the work that you're doing with Sunvoy, but then also educating the community as well, Joe. So thank you for your time today.
Likewise, Benoy. Thank you for being here. And I'm really excited to share this with our solar community. And now I can say, this isn't my first rodeo because it's done.
Of course, as well, play this podcast on the Solar Maverick podcast. And because I think this is great content, like this was a great conversation and we need more of these great conversations, Joe. So I'm excited to hear more of your podcast as you go forward, and good luck on the journey.
Oh, I appreciate that, Benoy. That's very kind of you. I appreciate you taking the time out here today. And I hope that when we get 100 under our belt, you'll come back on.
For sure. Anytime. I'm always happy if you need me to come on. So yeah, definitely. I appreciate the opportunity and your time today.
Thanks, Benoy. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time here on the What Solar Installers Need to Know podcast, brought to you by Sunvoy.
If you'd like to do the same or do better, go to sunvoy.com/blog and get actionable behind-the-scenes lessons on running and growing your solar business.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Renew Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@renewenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.